Not a memo, not a wire transfer, not a sealed directive or a classified authorization log. A photograph. Printed on standard paper. Placed face down on the table when Senator Richard Blumenthal arrived. Untouched for the first 50 minutes of testimony, while Pam Bondi navigated budget questions and enforcement policy with the practiced ease of someone who had survived every hearing this committee had thrown at her. And then Blumenthal picked it up, turned it over, held it toward the document camera so the room could see it clearly, and asked 4 words that no procedural shield, no executive privilege claim, no attorney objection could intercept in the moment they landed. Explain this photo. 71 seconds of silence followed. Not the processing silence of someone formulating a careful legal response. The specific, visible, uncontainable silence of someone who has just seen something they were not prepared to see and is spending every one of those 71 seconds calculating whether any answer available to them is survivable. Stay with me to the end of this. Because what Blumenthal placed on the table 30 seconds after the silence broke, the second item, the one that no network covered in full, is the piece that transforms everything the photograph means. And without it, you only have half the story. You need to understand what kind of photograph stops a room before we talk about what happened after it stopped this one. It was not graphic. It was not the kind of image that requires warning labels or content restrictions. It did not contain anything that would be disturbing in isolation. Its power came from something entirely different, from the specific, devastating ordinariness of what it showed, and from the precise gap between what was visible in the frame and what Blumenthal was about to say about the date and location of its capture. Senate Judiciary Committee. Dirksen Senate Office Building. Room 226. Thursday morning. The hearing had been running for 50 minutes when Blumenthal leaned forward and touched the photograph for the first time. For those 50 minutes, Bondi had performed flawlessly. Federal sentencing reform, DOJ budget allocations, immigration enforcement priorities. She moved through it all with the efficiency of a witness who knows exactly where the edges of a question are and stays precisely within them. By the time Blumenthal's turn came, she looked like someone who had almost completed a difficult but manageable morning. Blumenthal had not asked a single question in those 50 minutes. He sat with a yellow legal pad in front of him, and the photograph face down beside it, and did not touch either one. When he finally moved, the room noticed. His tone was the first thing that shifted the atmosphere. Not aggressive, not prosecutorial, quiet in a way that was more unsettling than volume would have been. The kind of quiet that makes a witness lean forward instead of pulling back, because it signals care rather than attack, and care, in a congressional hearing, is almost always the setup for something else entirely. Before my first question, he said, "I want to show you something." He turned the photograph over, held it toward the document camera. The image projected onto the screen behind him. Bondi looked at it, then at Blumenthal, then at her lead attorney, who was already writing. Her expression did not collapse. It did not freeze in the theatrical way expressions freeze in dramatizations of moments like this. It changed in a smaller, more controlled register, the micro-expression of someone who recognizes something they were not expecting to see, and who is spending the fractional second before response deciding which of the available reactions is most strategically defensible. Blumenthal gave her no fractional second. "Can you tell this committee," he said, "who is in this photograph? And can you tell us when and where it was taken?" The authentication objection came immediately from her legal team, without prior notice to the witness, without opportunity for proper review, without the procedural framework required for evidentiary introduction in a formal setting. Blumenthal answered it before the attorney finished speaking. The photograph was produced through civil litigation discovery in the Southern District of New York. 2 independent forensic imaging analysts authenticated it as part of that proceeding. The metadata confirms the capture date, the location, and the device. He looked at Bondi. The date is July 14, 2007. The location is a private residence in Palm Beach, Florida. The individuals present include Jeffrey Epstein and a woman who, according to sworn testimony in the same proceeding, was at the residence in a professional capacity connected to Epstein's operation. He paused. "The third individual in this photograph," he said, standing to Epstein's left, "is you." The room broke open. Not in the controlled way rooms process unexpected information, the murmuring, the note-taking, the measured professional response. In the immediate, involuntary way rooms respond when something reframes everything that came before it. Journalists on their feet. Gallery noise. Camera operators repositioning. The chairman's gavel striking 3 times before sound pulled back enough to register it. Bondi had not moved. Both hands flat on the table. The colour in her face had shifted in the specific way it shifts when a person is not experiencing shock, but is experiencing the enormous cognitive and physical effort of maintaining composed appearance under conditions that make composure almost structurally impossible. Her lead attorney rose. Objected. Characterized Blumenthal's approach as a fundamental violation of witness preparation standards and evidentiary procedure. The chairman looked at him. Authentication documentation has been entered into the record. The photograph stands. Sit down. The attorney sat. Blumenthal had not looked at the attorney once during any of this. He had been watching Bondi. Do you recognize this photograph? 71 seconds. 3 journalists in the room tracked it independently. 71 seconds where nobody spoke, where no procedural motion interrupted, where the room simply held the suspended weight of waiting for something that showed no sign of arriving. Her jaw moved once. Her hands pressed incrementally harder against the table surface. The muscle below her left ear, the one cameras had tracked through every prior hearing in this series, contracted twice in rapid succession. Her lead attorney leaned in and whispered something. She did not turn toward him. When she finally produced words, they were architectural, constructed to occupy space without containing information. She had attended numerous professional and social events during her tenure as Florida Attorney General and in subsequent periods. She could not confirm or characterize specific photographs without full review of context and circumstances. Blumenthal nodded as if this was precisely what he had expected. Then he reached into his folder and produced the second item. This is the part that did not get covered. This is the part that changes what the photograph means. A document, a single page from the sworn deposition of a witness in the same civil proceeding that produced the photograph. That witness had been asked, under oath, to identify the individuals present at the Palm Beach residence on the date the photograph was taken. The witness identified Epstein. The witness identified the woman to his right. The witness identified the third individual. Blumenthal read from the deposition transcript directly. The witness's identification, Pam Bondi, at that time serving as an assistant state attorney in Florida. He set the deposition page beside the photograph. 2 items on the table. Facing the cameras. Facing Bondi. A photograph authenticated through forensic analysis. A sworn deposition naming her by name and title and professional role at a specific location on a specific date. He looked at her steadily. In 2008, he said, your office declined to pursue criminal charges against Jeffrey Epstein in connection with the Palm Beach investigation. That decision allowed Epstein to negotiate a non-prosecution agreement with federal prosecutors, an agreement that legal experts across the political spectrum have subsequently described as extraordinary in its leniency. He paused. You were present at his residence the year before that decision was made. Another pause. I am asking you 3 questions. Was that visit disclosed at any point during your tenure as Florida Attorney General? Was it disclosed during your federal confirmation process? And did it in any way inform or affect the decision your office made regarding Jeffrey Epstein in 2008? The stillness that followed was a different category of stillness than the 71 seconds before it. That silence had been the silence of someone calculating. This silence was the silence of someone who has completed the calculation and arrived at the conclusion that all available answers create larger problems than the silence itself. When she spoke, each word was selected individually. Her record as Florida Attorney General spoke for itself. Any characterization of her office's decisions as having been influenced by personal relationships or social associations was categorically false. She rejected it completely. Blumenthal picked up the photograph. Set it back down. I did not characterize your decision, he said. I showed you a photograph. I showed you a deposition. And I asked you 3 specific questions. He looked at her. Was the visit disclosed during your tenure as Florida AG? She would need to review the relevant disclosure requirements at that time. Was it disclosed during your federal confirmation process? The confirmation process involves extensive background review. She had cooperated fully with all relevant aspects of that process. Did it inform or affect the 2008 decision? Her lead attorney stood. Executive privilege. Deliberative process. Prosecutorial discretion exercised by a state official in the lawful performance of her duties. Blumenthal looked at the attorney, then at the chairman. Executive privilege applies to communications with the president, he said. It does not reach prosecutorial decisions made by a state official 17 years before this hearing. The chairman looked at the attorney. Your client will answer. The attorney sat. Bondi looked at the photograph, then at Blumenthal. On the advice of counsel, she said, she was not in a position to answer questions that could be used to mischaracterize the lawful exercise of prosecutorial discretion. Blumenthal stacked the photograph and the deposition page together, aligned the edges, set them precisely on the table. 1 photograph, he said, 1 sworn deposition, 3 questions, no answers. He entered both documents into the permanent Senate record. The photograph, the deposition, the transcript of the exchange, all of it attached permanently to the same name, the same office, the same 2008 decision. He looked at her one final time. You came here today as the Attorney General of the United States, the official responsible for the integrity of the federal justice system. And you cannot or will not explain a photograph of yourself at Jeffrey Epstein's residence 1 year before your office declined to prosecute him. He gathered his materials. The American people will draw their own conclusions. I yield back. The hearing continued. It always continues. Other senators took the microphone. Other questions were asked. Bondi answered all of them with the same professional precision she had shown in the first 50 minutes. Policy. Procedure. Legal framework. Responses that stayed exactly within boundaries she chose for them. But the room had already shifted in a way that procedural continuity cannot reset. Because everyone present understood, the senators, the staffers, the journalists standing against the back wall, that the documentary architecture of this hearing had just changed permanently. The photograph was in the record. The deposition was beside it. The transcript of the 3 questions and their non-answers was beneath both of them. None of that moves. None of that responds to news cycles or official statements or subsequent clarifications. It sits in the permanent record of the United States Senate and says, with exact precision, on this date, in this room, this person was shown forensically authenticated evidence of her presence at Jeffrey Epstein's residence and could not answer 3 direct questions about what that presence meant for decisions her office made the following year. Blumenthal did not speak again during the hearing. He did not need to. The 2 items on the table had already done the work that verbal argument cannot do as cleanly. Because here is the fundamental difference between a document and a photograph in a moment like this. Documents can be classified. Documents can be sealed under executive privilege, shielded by work product doctrine, buried under authorization codes that trace back to offices that have since been restructured. Documents exist in legal frameworks that legal professionals can navigate with precision, because those frameworks were built by legal professionals and contain every exit that legal professionals know to look for. A photograph exists outside those frameworks. It is not a legal artifact. It is a record of physical reality at a specific moment. It shows who was present, where they were standing, what they were holding. It does not have a classification designation. It does not respond to privilege claims. It does not become less true because an attorney objects to the procedural circumstances of its introduction. And a sworn deposition identifying a person by name and title and professional role at the location and date the photograph was captured, that is not a characterization. It is not an argument. It is testimony given under oath in a federal civil proceeding by a person subject to perjury statute. Put them together, and you have something that procedural defense cannot touch, without generating a larger problem than the one it is trying to solve. Outside the chamber, the response followed the familiar pattern. Clips spread immediately. Different networks selected different angles and different excerpts and built different narratives around the same sequence. Some emphasized the procedural objections. Some focused on the broader context of the 2008 non-prosecution decision. Some avoided the photograph segment almost entirely. But the complete sequence, photograph, 71 seconds, deposition, 3 questions, 3 non-answers, was harder to find assembled in one place. Because assembled in one place, without editorial interruption, it does not need interpretation. The structure carries the meaning itself. Inside the Justice Department, the response was efficient and communicative of nothing. Routine testimony. Record complete. No further comment necessary. But behind that official line, the documentary review had already begun. Not for factual accuracy. For alignment. Whether every public statement made in connection with both the 2008 decision and the current role mapped cleanly against what the record now contained. When 2 items on a Senate table create that kind of internal review, they have already done something significant, regardless of what any subsequent statement says about them. There is a reason Blumenthal waited 50 minutes before moving. The first 50 minutes were not wasted time. They were construction. Question by question, exchange by exchange, he allowed Bondi to establish her cadence in that room. Her rhythm, the professional ease with which she moved through difficult material. He allowed the entire committee and everyone watching to see exactly what her controlled, prepared, comprehensive, non-responsive answers looked like when deployed against expected lines of questioning. And then he broke the rhythm with something that existed entirely outside it. That contrast between the smooth competence of the first 50 minutes and the 71 seconds of silence that followed 4 words is not incidental to the impact of the moment. It is the mechanism of the impact. You cannot fully feel the weight of that silence without having watched the competence that preceded it. The silence is only as heavy as the contrast that creates it. Blumenthal understood this. It is not a coincidence that he did not open with the photograph. 50 minutes of routine is what made 4 words hit like an architectural collapse. Here is what this moment is part of, beyond this single hearing. The Epstein file question has moved through this committee in layers. Each hearing has added to a documentary record that compounds rather than resolves. Each exchange has established, with greater precision, the specific shape of what is being protected, and the specific mechanisms being used to protect it. What Blumenthal introduced into that record is different in category from everything that preceded it. Wire transfers and authorization logs and sealed directives, these are artifacts of institutional process. They live inside the systems that created them and can be managed by the people who control those systems. A photograph of a person at a specific location on a specific date is not an artifact of institutional process. It is an artifact of physical reality. And a sworn deposition placing that person at that location under oath is not a characterization that can be reframed. It is testimony that carries its own legal weight, independent of what anyone says about it afterward. Together they establish a proximity, a documented, authenticated, sworn testimony-supported proximity, between a person who would later make a consequential decision about Jeffrey Epstein and Jeffrey Epstein himself, 1 year before that decision was made. Whether that proximity is meaningful, whether it informed anything, whether it was disclosed when it should have been disclosed. These are questions the record now contains permanently, in the form of 3 questions asked and not answered. And questions that enter the permanent record in that form do not disappear, because the hearing ends. They accumulate weight as time passes, and the absence of answers persists. They become reference points for every subsequent exchange involving the same name, the same office, the same decisions. The photograph is just a photograph. The people in it are just the people in it. That was Blumenthal's framing at the outset, and it was precisely right. Its power is not in what it alleges. It makes no allegation. It shows physical reality at a moment in time. Its power is in what it places permanently beside 3 questions that were asked under oath and could not be answered. Because in that gap, between question and non-answer, between 4 words and 71 seconds of silence, something entered the permanent record of the United States Senate that no subsequent statement can remove, and no procedural motion can reclassify. The record knows. It always knows. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because the civil proceeding that produced this photograph is still active, and the next document from that proceeding is already moving through the same channels that brought this one to a Senate table. When it arrives, you will want to already understand how we got here. 4 words. 71 seconds. Permanent record. And the photograph is still there.